everyone. It's Mike Levin. Tuesday, July 30th, 2019. Around 9 a.m. and I'm walking into work, catching the Staten Island ferry. I'll probably catch the 9:30 one, but if I don't, I'll catch the 10 a.m. one. I've already been working a couple hours this morning at home. I'm increasingly responsible for automations, which typically run early in the morning. So a lot of what I do is I wake up and monitor to make sure that everything that's supposed to happen happens correctly. So on days that I go into the office, I might day shift a little bit with that in mind. And so I don't sweat it about this details of this sort of quantized commute, because it shifts a half hour one direction or another based on which ferry you catch after 9 a.m. when they stop doing them every 15 minutes. So, c'est la vie, and I'm here to talk about the latest things on my mind. And I usually do that on these commutes, which I haven't been doing a lot lately. The scenery of my walk is just so beautiful. I tend to just sort of zone out and use it as sort of my solitary recovery time, and not go into this intense green arrow mode of the hunt. But there's a project I'm trying to push to completion, which actually does overlap with my public persona a little bit, in that I do have a new repo in GitHub. I've usually kept it down to just two, Pipulate and Levinix, the two projects for which I sort of like to be known for. They're always acquiring likes and follows and whatever. And however, they are both very general tools. They're tools for building things. And some of those things I want to build, it's time for one of them to be on the public side. And that's a heartbeat application that works sort of hand in hand with Pipulate. And to that end, I am making a script in Jupyter Notebook, as I most often start out, that's intended to be sort of just copy paste lifted out of Jupyter Notebook into a generic Linux scheduling system. And when I say that, I'm using something built into Linux called systemd, which really is a task monitoring and a respawner more than it is a scheduling system. And I'm using it to make sure that my, let's call it schedule.py, my Python scheduling script using the schedule package, is always running, which provides a very Pythonic interface to doing exact or period scheduling. And anyone who's dealt with scheduling knows that you can set things to run on an increment basis every 10 minutes, every hour, every day, or on an exact scheduled basis every day at noon, every day at midnight, etc. So Python provides a pretty nice API in general to all things, so that is no less true of a scheduling interface. So I use the Python schedule module, which is not part of the standard library, and you have to do a pip install schedule to get it, and then systemd keeps that running. For the heartbeat application, what I'm doing is I'm scheduling 6 different scripts to run throughout the day, spaced 4 hours apart. I'll probably do some sort of staggered fuzzing offset, which means sort of a randomized time offset to make sure that they don't start at exactly the same time every day. I don't like to jump in on the noon and midnight AutoScript bottlenecks, which I sort of implied I might, but I don't. So you calculate a random amount of time, insofar as you can do random, and add or subtract that to my start time. So it just staggers these 6 scripts to start on their 4-hour increments just a little bit off of the exact thing. So that's one thing. Another thing is that there's always an issue these days of sequential running of scripts versus concurrent. And concurrent is a euphemism for scaling. When things happen at the same time, you can have a lot more of them happen in the same time window as you would if you just did sequential one after another scheduling. So it sounds good, but the complexity of things doesn't just double, it quadruples or times tens when you go to concurrency, because unless you have more hardware in the picture, and when you scale, it gets distributed over a greater number of actual hardware resources, then you're dealing with something like a real fallacy with concurrency, in that it makes things faster automatically. It only makes you utilize your available resources more effectively. And if your available resources can only go so fast, in particular, if you're hitting against APIs out there in the real world, and those APIs have rate throttling quotas, like you can only hit them 10 times per minute or whatever, then concurrency works against you because everything starts to time out. And you, the errors that are introduced and the troubleshooting you have to do completely outweighs the advantage of concurrency. So with this sort of single cloud server scheduling I limit myself to sequential, and then just watch the jobs very carefully. I put nothing into one of those 4-hour windows that takes more than 4 hours to run, except when I do. And when I do, I make sure it moves off onto its own thread. So Python shoves everything into a single processing thread, which is where you get sequential processing from. Some people call it the GIL, Global Interpreter Locking. Some people call it a downside of Python. But Guido van Rossum, the creator of Python, has stuck by it over the years. Now that he's stepped down from the administrating authority and is only involved as another one of the advisors, things like that may change, which have been, one might say, dogma over the years, and others might say a very wise decision. But needless to say, sequential satisfies the 80-20 rule of productivity much more than concurrency. So when you pick up a tool like Google's Golang, which favors concurrency inherently as its primary interface, you have an increased amount of responsibility of things you got to keep track of in your head in ways that you don't necessarily have to in sequential processing. Things are easier, frankly, to put a not too fine of a point on it. Things are easier with sequential processing. So unless you go out of your way and break off a thread for a scheduled task, it's going to block the next scheduled task until it finishes. Unless, of course, you schedule it with exact scheduling, in which case the concurrency built in to the schedule package kicks in and overrides the sequentiality that you otherwise would get. So this is a lot to take in, I know, but the Heartbeat application, being one of my first forays into another public GitHub repo, is because when you're dedicated to a cause and there's a lot of parts in motion with that cause, you are often needed to have an all-in, always-on mentality. It's the mentality of IT people who have to keep the machines running, and sort of one of the ironies of the technology world, in that the very people who are attracted to Star Trek and high-tech things find themselves in the most rote, mind-numbing, monotonous jobs because they have their necks on the line to keep this technology equipment running. There's the inventive side, which is, your Barclays of the world, who are looked upon as nuts and inconsistent and unreliable, but who make the largest difference over the long run. And then you have your Scotties, who are not necessarily as creative, but know every trick in the book, every green arrow hunting trick to optimize and to tweak out everything you can given your existing resources, but they're not going to invent a new type of drive engine. So I am sitting right in the middle. I am sitting in the middle. I'm a non-linear thinker, Mr. Unicorn, leave me alone. When I need to be green arrow hunter, I am. It's where the money's at. It's where having your Python or JavaScript or Java capabilities wins you a decent salary, especially here within sight of the Emerald City, such as I am, where the marketing headquarters and advertising headquarters of every company in the world have gathered, because that's where the money is. So being a green arrow type programmer, a hunter, someone who knows how to optimize, who knows the 10 different techniques to do that one thing and can choose the best, can always command a good salary and can always punch a clock for the man, put in a good day's work for a good day's salary, provide your employer a better deal than they would normally get because you're in competition with youngins who don't know those 10 tricks and are going to take a much longer, more difficult route, and free up a lot of your capacity to gold brick and have a nice family and otherwise lower your stress in life. That is my path. Every once in a while, you take some of that excess capacity that you're stacking into your gold bricks and you put it back into your job, because the green arrow hunting mode is not necessarily enough for what you're trying to pull off. And that is the case right now with getting myself to be all in, always on, with an increasing level of automated tasks that are coming my way, which on occasion are going to have to scale. Scale in the sense that I throw in a second, a third, a fourth, a fifth, using a templatized system to deliver a innovation that we did across 10 more customers, properties, sites than I did before. And that is a form of scaling, nothing on the order of, Instagram or Google or Facebook, or the kind of scaling that they needed to do to accommodate, hundreds of thousands of users per second. I simply need to slot a lot more sites into a 4-hour time window that's running sequentially, so scaling fine, but a lot more of them. So I'm responsible for more, and to that end, I am creating this Heartbeat application, which I'm putting into the GitHub public, place where people keep their code. It's a version control system. And for those people who might be watching me for the first time, you ought to know that my stack is Linux, Python, Vim, and Git. And this is a Git thing. GitHub is the public popular repository where people push their code up, usually to share and collaborate, maybe for free and open source, almost always for free and open source projects where other people can jump on the bandwagon, make contributions, fork off their own versions. And I've done that with 2 projects from my past, which I always thought had a lot of popular capability, a lot of capability to become popular, and so they have to some modest degree. And I've resisted the temptation to show the application of my tool making tools, because hey, that's none of your business. There's always a point where sharing ends and proprietary begins. And how you use the tools, the masterful application of tool making tools, the use of the samurai sword, these are the things which, if you hold back, that's where you do it. Because in life, really, you can lay out your exact plans in front of somebody, exactly how and why you're going to do a thing. And they have nearly no capability to reproduce it because the devil's in the details. And the details are in how you use your tool-making tools. So Pipulate, Levinix, tool-making tools. The Heartbeat application of Pipulate could run on Levinix, wouldn't do it because of the 100% uptime reliability I strive for. So the Heartbeat application is something I drop into the scheduler, a generic Linux scheduler, being called by the schedule package of Python that I got through pip install schedule, which is continuously respawned and monitored by the Linux systemd system, which is a slightly newer way of doing their startup routine. So it used to be init.d, and then you would create all these little bash scripts. And instead of all this Linux script file stuff that requires a pretty formidable knowledge of Linux or Unix script, really is what we're talking about, the bash flavor of Unix script. It instead just makes you drop a filing location. And then all the commands are standard to start and stop a thing. And it has really, in the heart of a lot of people, I would say the majority of people, replaced the older init.d system. So it's systemd for daemon with init.d for daemons that are part of your initialization process. So there's a lot of Unix, Linux nomenclature you don't really need to know about or worry about it, except if you're going to use it, then start Googling systemd. You'll learn all about it. And then my schedule.py file, which is kept reliably run by systemd, subsequently runs 6 other Python scripts, each one of which I fill in with the day-parted tasks, jobs. And they can be their own files in turn, so there's sort of a nested file thing going on, or they can be directly in that script, which would sort of bloat it, but in short, there's 6 of them, 6 separate ones. I give them strong identities. I name them with the parts of the day, like, early morning, mid-morning, afternoon, etc. And this is the same nomenclature that I use to send me 6 emails a day. And these 6 emails have embedded into them a little JSON object. It sounds fancy, but it's just plain text formatted in such a way that if I wanted to, I could load the contents of that email back into a program and take follow-up actions based on whatever I put in that JSON object. So every program has the ability to return success, failure, whatever, increase details about the success or failure. And then that email that hits me, I can look at and take actions on, know whether I have to go back in and rerun a script, or, given enough time working on this, I hate system building for system building's own sake. So far, everything I've described has been extremely light touch, abiding by the 80-20 rule, but I very easily could have a task that uses the same error output from those emails to automatically take follow-up action. If a script needs to be rerun, I can have it rerun in the next 4-hour increment, in the next one of 6 day parts that I manage. And that sort of closes the loop on the whole thing. I will have to be always on, all in, like an IT person, but it creates a nice, friendly, sort of addictive environment that makes me feel good about myself, that makes me feel as good about this kind of work as anything else I could really be choosing to do in my life. It might be sort of hard to believe from the perspective of someone who hasn't gone, the Python programming route in particular, but that expertise of mastery, that satisfaction of expertise of achieving mastery that such people as samurai warriors and master carpenters achieve is readily had in doing Python custom coding. Because all you're doing really is expressing yourself. You are not doing this high-end, hotsy-totsy, often pretentious, large project building. It is absolutely the same as any other creative art form, where you can do small little things and they can have a large impact and are often the most satisfying when you work that way. Or they can be large, industrious undertakings that absolutely can do much more, absolutely are farther reaching in scope, but there's not enough time in the day to manage something like that once you build it, especially if you're a member of a small department whose secret weapon capabilities comes from a sort of scrap and rebuild mentality that, you know, by the time something goes so wrong you have to delve into diagnosing and fixing, you're usually on to the next thing and the next thing, and you're retiring old stuff and you're flighting new stuff. So that's kind of my world. That's kind of what I'm doing right now, and that's what I'm up to. So I'm about to get on the ferry if I made the 9:30 one. And thanks for joining me. Check out my GitHub, github.com/MikLevin, MIKLEVIN. Hope to see you again soon, and don't forget to subscribe.